Okay, this is James Weaver from Allen County. He is a veteran of the Second World War. Mr. Weaver, about what year did you go into service?
Well, it was 46, I believe it was.
44, you mean?
44.
Yeah, okay. And were you born in Allen County?
I was born in Morton County.
Okay. And moved to Allen County?
Oh, I don't know
okay.
when I moved there, but can't remember that.
Yeah. What was your parents' name?
My daddy's name was Wesley Weaver. My mother's name was Lily Weaver.
And did you have siblings?
Huh?
Did you have brothers and sisters?
Oh, yeah.
About how many did you have?
Well, there was 10 of us children.
Oh, my.
And my oldest one was Maydeen and Margie and my brothers was, well, Billy, John. It's going to be hard for me to remember all this, but it's been so many years. One was named Billy Weaver, one Gene Weaver, and one Henry, and Dewey D. And now I may not get them right, but
well, that's okay. Did you volunteer or were you called up?
I was called up.
You called up.
And
you were a paratrooper, right?
Well, I was an Army first,
Uh-huh.
and I joined the paratroopers later.
Okay.
What happened, I sent my mother half of my Army check. And they were poor people and had all them kids, and I wanted to help feed them. And then I felt sorry for them later, and I joined the paratroopers and got $50 more. So I sent them half of that from the live on. And that's about the only thing. I went to the Army and paratroopers. I made 7 jumps in the paratroopers. You have to make 5 to join, to graduate, and then you make 1 a month every time you're in there.
Uh-huh.
So I made 7 jumps in the paratroopers.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what time I come out of there or nothing about that.
Where did they send you? What theater were you at? Were you in
I was in the 511th paratroopers.
Was that in the Pacific Theater over?
No, I done that in the overseas after the war when I joined the paratroopers and on Okinawa. That's where I went first, and then I was all over Japan after the war.
So you were.
I drove a truck all over Japan and after the war.
Yeah. So you were part of the occupation forces there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I believe it was 46 when I come out of there. Seems like that something brings that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't remember all that. Anyway, I was I walked in a room, never been there, just walking around. The guy said, "Step in here." So I stepped in there, and it was a glider, Army glider, where they pull you up and cut you loose. So they took me up, cut me loose. I don't know how many thousand feet. I was coming on through the clouds. I was way up there, no telling how many thousand feet. Anyway, Only thing in there with me was a Jeep, and me with no education. How they got it, whatever to do with it. So I started pulling levers in there, see which way it goes. You go this way if I pull one, that way another, up and down. I figured out how to land it. And I landed it right in the front of their main headquarters. Slid her in there pretty hard on the concrete. And they started chewing me out. I said, now wait a minute. You guys have got more rank than me, 'cause I ain't got much. So it's my time to do the chewing. And you guys just shut up chewing on me, 'cause I ain't gonna take it. You're either gonna have to whoop me or something, and it takes a good man to do that. So they shut up and let me talk.
You weren't supposed to be in there to start with, were
I
you?
wasn't supposed to be there.
Yeah.
So I landed it there, and I said, that's what I think about. You guys ain't doing the thing right, or you wouldn't have put me in there in the first place. So that's the way I got to all I got to say to them.
Did you have any experiences jumping out of airplanes that you remember, or anything special?
Well, I made a night jump one time, me and another guy. I had a buddy in there, his name was Denver Moose. And we were just like brothers. And we'd back one another out. I said, we gonna jump? He said, hit the door, he told me. So we hit the door and we jumped out and we landed. Time you had to slow the plane down to 110 miles an hour to jump. So time they got that thing down there right, we was way off. We landed about 4 feet from the water in the ocean, tangled up. We both come down in my chute. Head collapsed on him. And we got out of that one. We had to walk about 6 miles the next morning to get back where we were supposed to go. And that was the experience of that. So,
After the war was over and you got back to the United States, kind of what did you do?
well, I can't remember hardly. I believe
Did you go working in a factory somewhere?
yeah, I worked in factories, and I worked in a factory, and I operated 21 machines in there. I could operate as long as I watched the guy work it a little bit, 10 minutes or something, I could run it. I run 21 different machines in that factory. And I told the guy, I said, now I can't make out that time card. After I got all that experience on them machines, he said, don't you worry about that time card. I'll take care of that for you. He said, you're the best man I've got in this factory. That's the words he told me. So I could operate anything if I watched it that was going, if I just had a little experience to watch them. And I could do the most, any kind of mechanic work. I operated on all my machinery when I was a fireman, worked on it, fixed it myself, and changed all of them vehicles, and farmed. I farmed for different men in Indiana for several years, and I ain't bragging on myself, but I imagine I was the best farmer in the country because I had experience from each one of the men. See, that's how I got my experience.
sorry. So that was in Indiana. Eventually, you moved back to Allen County, didn't you?
Yeah,
Bought your mother and father's farm. Is that right?
stayed there.
Yeah. So you've been there for a long time, I guess.
Well, not where I'm at. Let's see. I farm. I've got a farming in Kentucky too for several years. I own 108 acres there now.
Well, it sounds like you've had a pretty full life, Mr. Weaver.
Yeah. I doubt if there's a man walking on this earth that's done any more hard work than I have.
Yeah.
That's the reason I'm still going.
Yeah. And I understand you just recently got married again, is that right?
Yeah. I lived with my first wife 2 years and 2 days. She died on me. And I run into this woman that I got her from Walmart. She worked at Walmart. And I got to taking her sandwiches down there, and she asked me one day, she said, "Have you got a farm that I could ride a ice ski, you know?" I said, "I've got one you can go 100 miles an hour on it." Hell, you know. So I got to carrying her. Come over here and sit down. Get in the movies. Anyway, I took her home with me.
So you got you a Walmart bride.
Yeah, got me a Walmart.
He says you can get anything you want.
Well, Mr. Weaver, we thank you very much for sharing your stories with us, and we're glad that you're here with us today to honor you. We appreciate your service.
All right.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Okay, this is A. Lee Robinson. Robertson, I'm sorry.
Right.
He is from Warren County. He lived here in Barren County for a few years. He was the superintendent of Barren County Schools. Mr. Lee, what branch of the service did you serve in?
I was in the Army, 44th Tank Battalion.
So were you a driver or a shooter?
I was a tank driver.
Driver.
We went through basic training in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and I don't know how come he'd be a driver, but when we got through basic training, they said, "You're a tank driver." So that's what I did during the war. I did that we went on Tennessee maneuvers after basic training, and then we went to Camp Barkley, Texas for more training, and we went to Camp Donna Ana, New Mexico for combat training. Got on a troop train and went to Vancouver Barracks, got a boat, and next thing I knew, I was getting off that boat 45 days later and fence off in New Guinea.
New Guinea. So when did you go into service?
I went in the summer of 1942. I was drafted.
Yeah, you drafted, okay.
I never volunteered for anything, but I never turned down an assignment.
That's good.
I knew better than to do that.
Are you a native Kentuckian?
I grew up in Calhoun, Kentucky, in McLean County, on the banks of Green River. If you can't get that located, Calhoun is 18 miles from Owensboro.
Right, so we're south and west of Owensboro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the old route, if you were going from Owensboro to Madisonville, you'd go right through Main Street in Calhoun.
What's theater of war were you serving in? Were you in Europe or?
No, I was in the South Pacific.
South Pacific.
And New Guinea.
New Guinea, okay. Were you island hopping with? Is that what island hopping? Were you going from island to island, or did you?
We went from. We made 3 beachhead landings in New Guinea. That was Finchhofen, Maffin's Bay, and Zanzibar. And then we went from there, a beachhead landing in Morotai. That was the Netherlands East Indies. It was north. And from there we made the great big invasion of Luzon, the island that Manila was on in the Philippine Islands.
Yeah.
And that's where in fact, my 44th Tank Battalion in the history book, and I don't know how accurate it is, but they had listed in that book that we had a record of 66 straight days in combat.
Wow.
And that was retaking Manila.
That's a long time to go without a break.
To dodge, yeah.
To dodge. After the Philippines, what islands were you sent to?
Well, the Philippine Islands where I was when the war ended.
Okay.
And that was in August. We dropped those 2 atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and we had them whipped already. The 19-pound firebomb that our Air Force kept raining down on Japan is what killed them industrially. And we ended up, my battalion ended up occupying Japan at the end of the war. We went from Manila to Tokyo, and right in Tokyo Bay, and we saw those 16-inch guns on each side of Tokyo Bay. If we'd had to go in there while it was still fighting, it'd been terrible.
Yeah. How long were you in the Japan after the war ended?
Well, I got to Japan, and I'm a little rusty on the dates, but I think we got to Japan. Must have been the USS Missouri, where the surrender terms were signed, was still there when we got there. So we got there soon after war. I think is early August 1945, and we were there until the first day of December 1945.
Okay. Did you bring your tanks in, or were you put out on infantry?
The tanks they didn't get with us. I didn't have a tank in Japan.
Yeah.
I hadn't had that question asked before, and I wonder what happened to them, but I guess they stayed somewhere in the Philippine Islands.
Yeah. So you were sent home then about the 1st of December?
1st of December, I was on an aircraft carrier, and I don't know, but we were released from the service point system, and I was one of the last in my company because your points were on if you were a married person, if you had children, and if you had been wounded, and your age. And I was a younger guy, so I was one of the last ones to leave. And when I left on that aircraft carrier, I didn't know anybody. There wasn't anybody else from my battalion there. There's from everywhere else that we did on there. And it took us 15 days. We got back. We landed at San Diego on December the 15th, and we got on a troop train the 21st day of December. We got to Fort Knox the 23rd day of December. I was discharged the 24th day of December, 1945. Supposed to catch a bus from Louisville to Owensboro, Kentucky, and Owensboro was 18 miles from my hometown of Calhoun. But when we got there to the bus station, the roads from Louisville to Owensboro were icing up, so they sent us to the depot, and I rode a train from Louisville to Owensboro, and on that train there was a little girl that was from Calhoun that was working in Louisville. I didn't know, but she knew me, and her parents were picking her up in Owensboro that night when we got to the depot, and I rode with them to Calhoun, and I knocked on my door that I'd left 4 years earlier at 5 a.m. on Christmas Day.
That's great.
And my mom and dad, my sister, and I had a brother that was in the 101st Airborne, and he was wounded, and he had gotten over that, and he was home. So there were the 5 of us. That was pretty good Christmas.
That's probably one of your best Christmases.
I'd say it'd have to be number 1.
Yeah, yeah. After service, I take it you went to college and.
Yeah, GI Bill.
Yeah.
One of my buddies that was a fighter pilot in the war. He came by one Sunday afternoon in spring of '46, and he said, "Let's go to college." When I graduated from high school in 1941, a class of 32, and it was one person went to college. They didn't anybody go to college then, but the GI Bill, probably the greatest bill that was ever passed, took college out of the elite few into the masses. Yeah. So I went to Western in the fall of 1946, and it's been my home ever since. And I still, in my retirement, work at Western 100 days a year.
Wow. So you, I'm assuming you went into education.
I was in education. I graduated in 1950. I had a degree in physical education and a minor in English and biology. And my first job was teaching and coaching at Park City, Kentucky. That's 25 miles from Bowling Green. I went back to my home county of McLean and taught and coached and was the principal at Livermore High School. And the reason I went back, I started dating a little gal that was a neighbor of mine. When I graduated from high school, she's in the 2nd grade.
Oh.
We've been married 70 years, and she's 90, and I'm 100.
Yeah. And like as we said at the start of the saying, you eventually became superintendent of Barren County school system.
Yeah, after Livermore, I went back to Livermore and was there 5 years as teacher, coach, and ended up 3 years principal. I went back to Barren County as an assistant superintendent, and then the superintendent left for a statewide job, and I took over as superintendent, and I was offered a job back at Western Kentucky University, and I had to wait for the superintendent to get through with his statewide job to come back, and then I left and went to Western in April the 5th, 1960, and I'm still there, and they've made, I'm bragging a little bit now, but there's a life-size bronze statue of me in the Alumni Center at Western, and I've gotten the nickname of Mr. Western that's hung with me, and I said, I don't know whether I really deserve it or not, but I do appreciate it and enjoy it.
We appreciate you talking to us today, and we thank you for your service, and we thank you for coming over and visiting here with us today.
Appreciate it. I love Glasgow, I love Barren County, and my wife and I really enjoyed living here those short time back in 57, 58, 59, and 60.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Robertson, we thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure.
Okay, we have Ron Hansen. He lives now in Glasgow. He originally lived in Park City. Is that right? Just where you were born?
Well, no, Daddy lived in Park City. I was born in Bowling Green.
Bowling Green, okay. Ron's father was in the World War II service. So you were born in Warren County. Is that where you grew up, was in Warren County?
Until I was 15, and then Daddy got a permanent job at Mammoth Cave, as a ranger, and we moved to Cave City.
And about what time was that?
That was in the summer of 1960.
1960. So you would have been about 15?
I was 15 between my freshman and I started sophomore year at Caverna.
Okay. We said your dad was in service. What branch of the service was he in?
He was in the Army Air Corps.
Army Air Corps. What was his job in the Army Air Corps?
He wound up being a radio operator. He started out as a gunner on a bomber, but as they went through training, they moved him up to radio operator.
Okay. And he went into service. Did we ask you that? What time? When did he go into service?
September of 1942.
42. So shortly after, about 8 months, but after Pearl Harbor. 8 or 9 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was in service till the end of the war?
He was. He came home. He left France on July the 14th, which is one of their holiday. I forget what they call it. We talked about they thought they were having a parade. And he was
Something like Bastille Day?
Bastille. That's exactly what
Okay.
it was. He left on Bastille Day and talked about all the traffic.
Okay.
But
I guess
that's the day he flew. That's the way he started home.
That was probably a special Bastille Day for him after being liberated.
Yes.
So he spent his entire time in Europe after he
was trained. We left in September of 1944 on the Ile-de-France. They went to England, and then they went over into Europe, and they had bases in France, and then they wound up in a little town in Belgium.
Do you remember what him saying when he went into France? How long after D-Day?
Well, D-Day was June 6, 1944, and he went into France probably October of 1944.
Okay. So you said he was a radio operator when he by the end of the war he had
Yes.
transitioned over to a radio operator. When the war was over, how long was it before he was discharged?
I think he was discharged in September.
Okay.
When President Truman elected to end the war with Japan, I think that was September. I know Daddy always talked about being on Uncle Roy's. It was a Sunday afternoon. He was on Uncle Roy's front porch in the swing, and they heard on the news that the war with Japan had surrendered, because they thought they were going to have to go back to Japan.
So he was already stateside by the time
He was he got stateside in August, and I don't know whether they had 30 or 60. Must have had 60 days maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But he had flown 41 missions, and they were usually just asked to fly 25, but they'd gotten close to the end, and they didn't let anybody go home until they finished off the German occupancy.
So he was flying out of France into Germany?
Well, Daddy always, he said, when I used to say he flew over Germany, but he said, no, son, I was flying over occupied Europe. So a lot of his targets were places that the Germans had taken over.
Right.
You know, you see The Sound of Music, and
Right.
you know, the play of Austria and some of those other. Daddy, I have a list of the 41 missions that he flew, and he kept a record of who, in one of the little pen-worthy notebooks. He had the date, the target, the pilot, and the co-pilot, and he's supposed to get to go home after 25 missions, and every fifth mission, Daddy would, in that pen-worthy notebook, he had drawn a line under 5, 10, and 15, but I don't think there's a line under 20, because they'd already heard that they were going to finish them off, and they wanted to get to come home before they got to come home.
Growing up, did he talk much about his time in service?
Not much at all. But later in life, and when I got to spend more time with him, we talked about it a lot. But our son got him a World War II veteran's hat, and Daddy wore that proudly, and was even prouder when people would buy his lunch at Cracker Barrels. But and then it seemed like he loosened up and excuse me, was more free with talking about it.
Are there any stories that he told that kind of stick out in your mind?
Yeah, there are a number of stories that he told, but he probably would want me to tell the story of his brother's passing. And if I may, his brother Pete was killed on the island of WW2 in May of 1943, before Daddy had gone over there. And Pete was a scout, but they were all cave explorers. So I'm sure when the government saw that Pete was a cave explorer, they thought, well, he'll be a good scout. And so they sent Pete in for training. They sent him to They trained for service in North Africa. But when the when the Japanese invaded the Aleutian Islands, they took, I think, about 5,000 troops out of North Africa and sent them to the Aleutian Islands. And Pete was a scout, and he was killed because of that job. Really, he was about 100 yards ahead of his company, and he saw the machine gun nest that was getting ready to. They were just waiting for the full company. So Pete attacked the machine gun nest, and of course was killed. But Daddy, two different times in the 90s, people came through in Park City and Cave City, and they found my dad's and my Uncle Garner's numbers in the phone book, and I know at least two people came by and they asked Daddy, "Are you Pete Hanson's brother?"
Yeah.
He said, "Yeah." I said, "I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Pete."
Yeah.
That would be the first story he'd want me to tell.
Your dad had several brothers that were in service. Is that right?
Well, my dad had two brothers. I tell people that I had 7 uncles who served. My mother had 4 brothers and 1 brother-in-law who served, and my dad had 2 brothers. So there were 8, counting my dad, of uncles and father that served in World War II.
Did they cover all branches of the service? Or
They did.
Did
They did.
Yeah.
And all of them but my uncle Eugene, they were all from Barren County.
Wow.
The 4 Willis brothers, Wilson, served in the Philippines in the artillery in the Philippines. My uncle Woodford, his brother, Woodford Willis, was in the Quartermaster Corps for General Patton. His brother Harold was an infantryman in Patton's army. And my Uncle Arthur never did go overseas, their brother, but my Uncle Garner he worked at Allied Command Headquarters in New Caledonia. He encoded and decoded messages. And then Pete was in the infantry and was killed in action in 1943.
So, did you just have 1 or 2 uncles that didn't survive the war?
Well, no, and my Uncle Eugene, who lived in Oakland, he served in the Aleutian Islands as well, and he stayed on. I think he was a cook in the army in the Aleutian Islands. Mm-hmm. And then Pete was the only one who didn't come back.
Yeah. Would you say that your father's service had any specific effect on him that you could mention? Anything that would stand out in your mind, make him maybe bolder or more confident? Of course, you probably wouldn't know whether he was more confident before or after the service.
I know he was very shy when he went in, and but I also noticed that he wasn't afraid of anything. But I thought to myself, what are they going to do to scare you if you've been through all this?
All right.
You asked me about stories, and I talked about Pete. I'd like to tell a couple of stories that Daddy told me.
Okay.
He flew in a B-26, and they strafed. And Daddy, and this was a gun, if you look it up, it fascinated me. Daddy, the gun was designed to rotate, and it shot through the propellers. The ammunition came out while the propellers were going as fast, and it was timed so perfectly that it came out. Mm-hmm. So they did a lot of strafing. But Daddy, he always talked about, just the wonders of that plane. But, so it was about half as big as the ones that the pilots had trained on. So they called it the Widowmaker because it would react so much faster to corrective actions that the pilot would take than the bigger planes did. That there were a lot of flying mistakes. Daddy was fortunate in that regard. One incident in the air, the doors didn't come back up after they dropped their mission, after they dropped their bombs. So there was a walkway between these two doors, and Daddy said he had to go out on that walkway and pull those doors back up so they could land, because the doors were longer than, to drop down below the wheels. And he said he got it back up and got back in the plane, and the bombardier accidentally hit the door again, and it came open, so they had to. But they were already in descent, so they had to land anyway. But he said he had a great pilot, and they brought it in.
That was in France?
Well, they were flying out of Belgium or France one. It was like that. It was in occupied Europe. I'm not sure which one of those missions it was. Yeah. But it was in occupied Europe, or Germany.
Yeah, my father was a pilot as well, and some of the stories they tell. Of course, he flew cargo. He didn't fly combat missions. Did your father train on the 26, or did?
No, they did not train on the 26. They didn't see a B-26 till they got overseas.
Okay, so it was that new that
it was that new.
Yeah.
Now they got there in late September, and his missions, there were just one or two before about the middle of November. So I'm sure they were, I didn't ask Daddy, but I'm sure they were learning the plane, during that time. Mm-hmm. But their objective was to knock out bridges and ammunition factories and I think they call them munitions depots, but that was their primary targets.
Going back to his post-war life, you said that he eventually became a guide at Mammoth Cave?
Yeah, he had been that before, and he'd been trying to get on full time at Mammoth Cave, but nobody would ever quit their job.
Right.
So finally, he passed the test for whatever test that was that you could be a ranger for. He passed it 3 or 4 times, but like I say, there was never an opening until 1960, and they hired him as he was always summertime guide, and I'd go there on Fridays with him. and that's a whole new family for people because they were all so close that the guides almost felt like they were my uncles too. But Daddy finally got on in 1960 full time. We'd lived in Bowling Green, and he worked at Pan American Mills, and when he wasn't working at Mammoth Cave, he worked at Pan American Mills.
Did he take advantage of the GI Bill?
He did not. Well, you know, I say he didn't. He did. He built a house for us after work in 1950 and 51. We moved in the Christmas of 1951, I believe, and moved into our new house. But now whether he used any of that, I don't know. He may have. Yeah. I don't know that. Yeah. He did it. He built it with his own hands.
Yeah. So, did he do carpentry work for pay, as well as working at the mill, or was that just for himself, for his family?
No, he and my uncle H.C. Were going to be. They did some housings, but they built some houses themselves, and then they worked for a Marguerite Webster in Baltimore. They built several houses for her, but H.C. left and went to UK to engineering school, and then Daddy started working at the mill. And like I say, he always worked at Mammoth Cave whenever he could work there. That was usually from May to September. But, when he got on in 1960, he was full time. And my grandfather, his daddy, had been a guide there for all his life. That was all my grandfather had done. Mm-hmm. When he died, the Courier Journal had an article in front of the second section that said "The Grand Old Man of Mammoth Cave."
Yeah. You were only child?
I am an only child.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, whatever experiences that you remember, it's pretty much you remembering the experience.
It's me. Yeah, it's me. It is me.
Yeah.
But I know Daddy was very patriotic. He loved his country. He wound up with a flagpole in his front yard.
Yeah.
And he would take it down every once in a while, especially when our grandson Peyton was there. And they'd take it down and fold it up just like they do at a memorial service. And that's one of our favorite pictures. Just my dad and Peyton folding that flag.
Yeah. Was he a member of like VFW or anything like that?
American Legion.
American Legion.
Post 23 in Bowling Green. He was that. And I'll never forget standing with him at the national anthem at Western when the guy's first name is Larnell. I can't remember his last name, but he gave a beautiful rendition of the national anthem at a Western ball game. And I'm standing there by my dad, and I realized there were tears coming down my cheeks. And I realized I was one of the free because he was one of the brave.
Yeah, exactly. He was also, was he a coach, a baseball coach for like Little League or something like that? Or
No, he wasn't that.
Yeah,
he had too many jobs.
Too many jobs going on.
Yeah.
That was just you. Huh?
That was just me, yeah.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add to this?
I probably, well, like I say, I had my dad and 7 uncles. 2 of my uncles, I was their healthcare surrogate in their old age. I got to spend a lot of time with them. I got to hear a lot of stories that they had of the war, and I just feel blessed to be an offspring of so many of my heroes. I told Daddy when I was of age about the time the Vietnam War came along, and they didn't draw my number, and I was a daddy and all this, and so I had several to furnace. And I don't know, in 73 or 4, I told Daddy, I said, well, it looks like I'm not gonna get to be a veteran. And he said, that's all right. You have your family served, and that's I guess I take comfort in that.
Yeah.
Too. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ron. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Jim.
Okay. This is Jenny Hogan. Hogan, okay. And he is a World War II veteran, served in the Navy. Where were you born?
I was born in Cave City.
Cave City. And when the war broke out, did you volunteer or were you drafted?
Well, I was what they call a selective volunteer.
What does that mean?
It means I didn't have to go because I already had 3 brothers in. And my dad needed me on the farm, and it helped me. I didn't have to go on account of that.
Uh-huh.
I was the only one left to help me on the farm.
Yeah. When did you go into service?
1944,
1944.
April.
And what was your job in the Navy?
Well, I was second loader on a twin 48 gun.
So you were a part of a gunner crew.
Yes,
Okay. Was this a battleship, a cruiser, or what?
it was the smallest sea-going ship the Navy had. They built them in the last part of the war, an aircraft. And it was loaded down with guns. And it had rocket launchers, 10 rocket launchers.
Wow. And I'm assuming you spent your service time, wartime service in the Pacific?
In the Pacific.
Yeah.
all in the Pacific.
What campaigns were you involved in?
I was only involved in one. I was Okinawa.
Okay. That was a pretty vicious one to
Yes,
be.
it was.
Yeah. How many days would you say you were in the area of Okinawa?
I'd say 30 days anyway, maybe more.
Yeah. And I suppose you were pretty much in combat the whole time?
Just about all the time.
Yeah.
They put us, after the invasion, we were there for the invasion. After that, they put us on what they call a picket line. We'd go out and between Japan and Okinawa and serve for 4 days and come back in the,
Sort of to keep them away?
yeah,
Yeah.
head off the kamikazes.
Right. Did you ever get attacked by a kamikaze?
Yeah.
You did? Did they manage to hit your ship?
No, they didn't. We shot down 5 of them.
Wow. Yeah. Where did you take your training?
Fort Pierce, Florida.
Florida. So about how long was your training period? How long did that last before they send you into action?
It was about 2 months.
3 months. That's not long.
We had a full-blooded Indian, Air Corps Indian that trained us down there.
Uh-huh.
He was the chief Indian.
Well, that's kind of unusual for a Native American to be in the Navy. you don't think of that, do
He
you?
was.
Yeah. When you left Florida, I'm assuming you left Florida and headed for the Pacific. Did you go through the Panama Canal and that way?
We went to Boston from Florida and picked up a brand new ship.
Uh-huh.
When they just built it, it came down and we got on it as soon as it hit the water with a new crew and a new ship.
Well, that's nice, I guess, as far as getting all new facilities to house you.
Didn't have much room on it, so it was 150 men on a small ship, about 167 foot long,
Yeah.
14 foot wide.
Was it built for speed?
No, it wasn't built for seeds. It's built for fighting.
Okay.
It's loaded down with guns.
Wow. Do you have any memories of the time you were in Okinawa? Anything in particular that happened to you that stands out in your mind?
Two or three things.
You wouldn't mind letting us in on what you remember?
Well, we've been out on the picket line for about 4 days and came into a big bay there they had for a 2-day rest before we went back on the picket line. And while we're in there, I don't know how many ships was in there, but it loaded down with American ships, hospital ships, battleships, cruisers, everything was in there. And this Japanese bomber come in on one end of it, and he got in somehow, I don't know, and bombed a destroyer on one end. And then he got down low in the water and came right down through the bay. We could shoot at him. They gave orders nobody shoot at him because it might hit too many ships first there. And he was low in the water. And he had his machine gun going, tearing the ships up as they came by with that. And there's a little ship just like ours next to us. I saw him hit him, and we were next in line. I was waiting for the bullets to start hitting me because he tore up a gun that we were on another ship. And when he got there, he lowered his gun for some reason, and the bullets were right in the water alongside of our ship. Then the bullet touches. And he went on this. We were the last ship in a row, and he got past us, started up the mountain. We shot him down.
Oh.
About halfway up the mountain.
Paid him back.
Yeah. So he didn't make it. That was one very scary time.
I imagine so.
I thought for sure maybe had 10 more seconds.
Yeah. Where were you when the war with Japan ended?
I was at Saipan. We had orders to go to Japan for the invasion. We'd come back to Saipan for some rest and work on the ship a little bit. And we were waiting for the invasion of Japan when the bomb was dropped.
Did you were you still in? How long were you in service after Japan had surrendered?
About 6 months, I think.
Okay.
We went on to Japan with occupation troops and patrolled over around Japan for a while. Hauled mail out to the other ships. Did all the jobs that they wanted done. Followed a minesweeper, and he'd cut the bombs loose from the water, we'd sink them with their guns.
Did the Japanese, once the surrender took place, did they have a lot of ships at sea that returned to Japan, or what happened to those ships?
They didn't have many ships left.
Didn't have any left.
We went up to a big base where the Navy was after the war, and went in there, and there wasn't hardly any ships. There's a lot of little submarines and stuff like that.
I'm assuming that you got shore leave while you were there. What was your impression of Japan when you went in on shore?
Well, Tokyo was pretty nice. They hadn't been hit hard. You saw a few places had bombed, but not many. And the people were always friendly with us, everything.
Did they seem to be happy it was all over?
Oh, I think so, yes.
Yeah. I'm sure you were too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when did you get to go back to stateside?
I came back, I'm not sure, about 2 months after that, came home.
Yeah. Nice to get home.
Nice to get home.
Yeah.
We came back and came in San Francisco, stayed there a while, and went up to Portland, Oregon, and put the ship out of commission at Astoria, Oregon.
Did you ever get to run into your brothers while you were in service?
No, I got pretty close. But one brother was on Guam when I was on Saipan.
Was he in the Navy as well, or
He was in the Marines.
Marine Corps?
He'd hit just about all those islands over going over.
Tough job.
Was that Turner?
At that time, they were getting ready for the invasion of Japan like we were.
You said you had another brother in service?
I had 3 then, brother.
3?
One was in the Marine Corps, one was not in the Army Air Force, and one was in the Navy.
So you about covered them all. Your mom and dad did.
Yeah.
Were you married or anything when you went into service?
No,
Okay.
I went right out of high school.
Yeah.
What was your second memory of Okinawa?
The second memory, I guess, is when we hit the reefs, got on the reefs. I was on guard about 12 o'clock one night and I heard a loud scraping noise and everything. I was getting off watch. And we hit the reefs. We got on the reefs and couldn't get off. We was patrolling between 2 islands, helpers, Japan. And the water ran up, and we hit it at high tide. And just couldn't get off, so we sat there for a day and a half before they sent a ship out there to pull us off the reef so we could get going again.
Did it do much damage to the ship?
Not too much. We went in what they call, and had those big ships where you go in and they can let the water out from under and look at the bottom. And then they scraped it, didn't do anything to it. Didn't damage it any.
Well, that's fortunate. Did all your brothers make it back home?
Everybody made it back home with my family.
That's great. I know in my family, my dad had 3 brothers all in service too. They all made it back home.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. After the war, what occupation? What did you do for a living?
I worked for a railroad
Okay.
47 years in the communication department. I was a specialist, communication specialist.
So that, I'm assuming, is a job in a central office somewhere that you communicate with trains?
I started out at KCH climbing telephone poles.
Oh.
And went to Bowling Green after that for a while. A little better job than I went to Louisville. Worked in the office building up there where we had all the communication equipment.
Did you take advantage of the GI Bill when you got out?
Well, I bought a house on the GI Bill with all.
One of the best things that they ever come up with, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was real nice.
Yeah. Do you have anything else you'd like to tell us about?
Well, we got caught in a typhoon coming back from Japan on the way home. We thought the ship was going to sink. Water would come all over top of it.
Oh my.
You'd wonder if it's coming back up every time. We lost 2 engines and that slowed us down. The convoy went off and left us. So we got in the next day and the Honolulu left, they got there. But they was all standing out there waving at us and welcoming us when we got there. None of the officers, anybody didn't think the ship was going to hold up, but it did.
I guess that new design worked.
Yeah.
You stayed on the same ship through the whole time you were?
The whole thing.
Yeah.
Went on the ship, got on the ship. Got on the ship in Boston, got off after the war in Astoria, Oregon.
Yeah. What was the name of the ship?
Didn't have a name, had a number.
Oh,
Number LCSL 111.
okay. I guess I just assumed all ships had a name.
No,
We all were all called what, the Mighty Midgets?
yeah, we were called them Mighty Midgets. Got the nickname of the Mighty Midgets.
He went in and raised a lot of trouble.
Yeah. Well, that's so many guns on it.
Well, Mr. Holman, we appreciate you talking to us, and we appreciate your service.
Thank you.
My father, from the same generation, I know what it's meant for our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Houston Gentry. I was born February the 8th, 1911 in Mount Hermon, Kentucky to Varney and Benny Gentry. I lived in Monroe County my entire life, other than the years that I spent in the service. I volunteered for the Army on January the 11th, 1940. I was assigned to the 18th Engineers, but that battalion was split up and I was reassigned to the 804th Engineering Battalion Aviation. I was stationed in Hawaii. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, I was stationed at Schofield Army Base. We saw smoke and heard bombs coming from Pearl Harbor. And about 10 minutes later, Schofield was under attack as well. I was on guard duty for the first time as a sergeant in charge of 7 guard posts. I had been on guard duty since about midnight. And about 7 a.m., we saw smoke coming from Pearl Harbor and heard what sounded like dynamite. They had been doing training exercises and construction over there, and we didn't think a lot of it. We thought it had something to do with that. I went back to the guardhouse, and I got a phone call that said that the Japanese were bombing Pearl Harbor. I woke up the bugler, and he sounded the call, and we cleared our company out of the barracks, and we got them all to the bomb shelters, and we got everybody down there before the Japanese ever even reached Schofield. The other guards and I stayed at the barracks that night and throughout the rest of the attack. About 10 minutes after I got that phone call, the Japanese were bombing Schofield. They had started at Pearl Harbor. The attack moved on to Hickman Airfield, and then they proceeded to Schofield from there. The Japanese, when they were bombing, kept trying to hit these big water tanks there at Schofield. I think they thought they were maybe gasoline tanks or something, but they never hit those. The barracks only sustained minor damage. None of our company was killed, but the Japanese did bomb a mess hall in the middle of breakfast, killed about 400 men. They also bombed 7 aircraft hangars there at Schofield and really tore those up bad. We stayed at the we stayed at the barracks that night, Sunday night. That evening, a few Japanese planes came back, but they didn't really do much damage. Some men from our company found us there in the barracks the next day on Monday and took us down to the bomb shelters as well. Shortly thereafter, I got a directive from our commander to take 2 men and to run telephone line to the headquarters. When we did that, we got captured. Right after the attacks, sabotage was suspected everywhere, and the U.S. soldiers who captured us had feared we were spies. So we ended up having to stay at the guardhouse that Monday night, but our commander found us on Tuesday and got us out. In the following days, I was put in charge of a project building camouflage nets there at Schofield. School had been canceled in the wake of the attacks, and they trucked in high school girls who all worked under my supervision making these camouflage nets. We worked 6 days a week, probably for 5 or 6 weeks doing that. And in the coming months, I also helped with repairing Schofield. We mostly stayed in Hawaii during that time, though we were also at some of the other islands in the South Pacific as well, building airfields as areas became secured. I spent time in the Gilbert Islands, in the Marshall Islands, and then on the island of Saipan. I was put in charge of building airfields on Saipan. We built 2 airfields side by side for B-29s, a mile and 3/4 long each, and we built it from scratch. Not long after that, our company was split up. Most of the men were returned home, but I stayed on Saipan for a few months. I was put in charge of fueling operations there on Saipan for the entire island, and I did that for the rest of the war. I was discharged on October 17th, 1945. Came back to Monroe County, went into the service station business with my brother Sonny Gentry. I eventually sold my part in the business to my brothers Omer and Hubert Gentry. I went to work for the highway department. And I did that until I decided to go into farming full time, which I did until 1975 when I retired following a stroke. In 1946, I married Evelyn Dickon. I had 4 children: Mike Gentry, Sam Gentry, Noretta Baxter, Don Scott. Got them all. And we had 6 grandchildren. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your stay.
Alright, this is about flying the hump. During World War II, Japan closed the Burma Road. This famous road connected India to China. In February of 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt ordered the pathway to China be kept open. China was considered to be the only base for eventual counterattack against Japan. The only option was an air route from China to India over the Himalayan mountains, dubbed the Hump. As it was called, thus required the introduction of the Curtiss Commando cargo plane, the C-46. This was a cargo plane that could reach altitudes of well over 10,000 feet. Some B-24 bombers were converted to haul fuel and other supplies. C-54s, C-109s, and C-87s flew the Hump as well. The commanding officer, Colonel Hardin, ordered the pilots not cancel the flights over the mountain due to weather or even reports of Japanese fighter planes and attack plans. Hump pilots had to contend with possible attacks from Japanese fighter aircraft, stormy weather, turbulence, and extreme mountain conditions. Accidents were common. They flew without the benefit of today's modern technology to guide them. The cockpit of the C-46 was not pressurized, making temperature control a great challenge for the crews. They flew cargoes of fuel, supplies, and troops from India to China. Now, with us here today is my grandfather, Sergeant First Class Martin Broccoli, as a Vietnam War veteran, and he's going to be introducing a Hump pilot that he was friends with, Amos here.
Excellent, excellent. If I can do a good job.
Set the standards.
Let me introduce myself. I don't have to read this. I'm Martin Broccoli. I'm retired from the Army after 20 years. And I was very good friends with Amos Houck. I was cutting grass one day, just a short story. I was cutting grass in Horse Cave. This gentleman came up to me, introduced himself as Amos Houck. We talked, and after a couple minutes, he goes, "What church are you affiliated with?" I says, "None, because we just moved here." Well, needless to say, after he got done with me, my wife and I became members of the Horse Cave Baptist Church. Here is the story. The story began on 15 February 1925 in Hardyville, Kentucky, and ended in eternal peace 7 July 2014 and is buried in the Horse Cave Main Cemetery. Amos's service began in the United States Army Air Corps 15 July 1943 at Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indiana. In then off to Miami Beach, Florida for more training and primary training in Cedar Falls, Iowa. It always amazes me, he ended up in Miami Beach for training, initial training. Amos earned the nickname Poles because on his solo flight in his PT-13 aircraft, somehow veered off the runway and took down some telephone poles, cutting telephone service to the base, the control tower. Thus, his buddies nicknamed them Poles. Oh, one important thing. The plane was cracked up, but Amos walked away without a scratch. Thank God. Amos departed Cedar Falls, a full-fledged pilot, having had a whopping 2 hours and 15 minutes of training in the air. He was then off to Santa Ana, California to receive his classification training and becoming an aviation cadet in March 1944. He continued training and received his silver wings as a flight officer on 20 November 1944. 18 July 1945, Amos and crew, co-pilot and 2 enlisted, departed for Karachi, India. So on his way up the east coast to Greenland, they were flying. They got in their electric suits, comfortable, enjoying themselves, when the #1 engine started not functioning properly, which meant the carburetor was freezing up and thankfully, or icing up, and thankfully #2 engine ran smooth. So in Amos's word, after some tinkering and fooling around, they got the engine running smoothly and was off to Greenland. They went. Amos's words were, "It's not nice at all." Amos would like to let you know that his plane, the C-46 Curtiss Commando, was not armed. There was no machine guns, no nothing. The only weapons they had on board were their sidearms, their Colt 45s, or their Colt 1911s, and a couple of rifles for the enlisted people. Typical of 20-year-olds, which Amos and his crew were, they flew into Marseille, France for some minor engine repairs. And of course, they were having a jolly good time on the beach and enjoying themselves. When their company commander called them and said, "Gentlemen, if you're not in the air within the next hour or so, I'm going to put you in jail." Needless to say, Amos and his crew all headed to the aircraft. They took off and headed to Tripoli, Libya. On September 6, 1945, was his first flight over the hump. Most of his flights were between Mayan, Guyana, and Kunming, China, hauling 50-gallon barrels of 100-octane gasoline in support of the Chinese army. There has been plenty, I don't have it here, but plenty of instances where Amos was flying, he'd look over out the windows and the plane would follow pilots, the plane would disintegrate, blow up in midair. He did not have self-sealing gas tanks on planes. On 30 September 1945, my crew and I learned the hump was closed after making 15 round trips over the hump. Yep, wow, it was definitely it. Later, Amos served with the 333rd Troop Carrier Squadron of the 513 Troop Carrier Group. Here his crew hauled some Chinese troops and supplies to help contain the Japanese after their surrender. Amos had a mission to go to a newly captured Japanese air base. Circling the air base, he looked down and there was Japanese Zeros lining the run both sides of the runway, and Japanese troops still walking around with their rifles slung over their shoulders. Amos, 20, went out the cargo door, stepped down, and here was a Japanese soldier presenting his sword of surrender to Amos. You can imagine a country boy from Hardyville doing that. He was always conscious. He kept saying, "Martin, I didn't know what to do, but everything worked out fine." After 22 long days at sea, he finally arrived in San Francisco, California, and was very thankful to be back in the good old USA. To his honor, Amos achieved a grand total flying time of 748 hours and 15 minutes with 39 months and 8 days of distinguished service to his country during World War II. Amos was honorably discharged from the Army Air Corps on 15 May 1946. Just to show you some quick facts, 509 planes crashed as of 1945. 81 aircraft were lost. 328 lost aircraft were from Amos's Air Transport Command. There was 1,314 crew members were known dead. 1,171 walked out to safety. God must have been with them all that day during this time. 345 crew members declared missing. And that is Amos's story.
They've asked me to say a few words about what it was like to be raised by a World War II veteran. And you'll have to keep in mind I'm only one of 6, okay? So I can only tell you what it was like for this child of the World War II veteran that I was privileged to call Dad. I believe before I can do that justly, I need to give you a little information about my father before he became a soldier. I think that seldom does any one event or set of circumstances define one completely, no matter how traumatic or profound that situation may be. Dad lost his mother at age 7 due to illness, and I don't know how that affected Dad's childhood, but it had to have in some way. Dad grew up on Skaggs Creek, hunting up and down the hollows. I think the skills that he honed while stealthily slipping through the woods after the elusive gray squirrel served him well later on when he was trekking through the dense jungles of the South Pacific after a far more elusive and far more dangerous prey. Same could be said about the marksman skills that he sharpened in his youth. During these early years, Dad also learned the power of savings. I recall him reminiscing about selling berries and wildlife that he had harvested and sold to family and neighbors to earn extra money. Some of his fondest recollections were of the first rod and rail and the first .22 single-shot rifle that he purchased with the money that he'd saved up. Dad attended school through the 8th grade, and that was considered higher education in the rural community of Cedar Grove for those who also had the obligation of farm life at that time. I have no doubt that Dad absorbed everything that was put in front of him: reading, writing, arithmetic, history, civics, agriculture. I've seen Dad use the Pythagorean theorem to calculate square roots by hand while he was laying out a concrete pad to make sure it was square. Dad was inducted into the Army on August 4, 1942. He realized he had an obligation, a duty to answer when his country called him to serve. He knew that only through the willingness to sacrifice oneself for the greatest, most blessed country on earth could one truly continue to appreciate that greatness. He'd been taught, like generations before, that this country was founded by great men and women who were willing to sacrifice all so everyone could pursue the happiness, the life, and the liberty that only this country could provide. Today, comments like that are political. Back then to Dad, they were just patriotic. Dad loved his country. And he loved his family. He was willing to sacrifice to protect both of them. Dad didn't talk a lot about his time in service. Not that he wasn't proud of it. He was just not a boastful man. He felt that all those that had served alongside him made the same sacrifice. He was awarded a Bronze Star, along with other service and battle ribbons during his time of service as a tech sergeant. He once explained that he'd received a recommendation for a Silver Star, but he declined because he felt his valor was no greater than those men who served under his command. Dad didn't talk much about faith or religion either, but he made sure his children were exposed to the Word. He'd have us children line up in front of him for inspection before we went off to Sunday school. Let me see those shoes. Let me look under those fingernails. Let me see behind those ears. Having passed the inspection, we were carried off to Sunday school, only to come home, change clothes, and get ready for a big Sunday dinner. That's what we called it back then, that meal in the middle of the day. You know, supper was for nighttime and dinner was for noontime. Mom and Dad made sure their children were raised with manners. No hats on at the table. Elbows off the table. Yes, please. No, thank you. Yes, ma'am. No, sir. Clean your plate. We ate well growing up, with a 2-acre garden in the backyard and a field full of cattle and ponds full of fish. We worked for our food. Well, most of it. The fishing on Sunday afternoons didn't feel much like work, but it provided just the same. Work was just expected. We all grew up working on the farm. Mom supervising during the day and Dad taking over when he got home from work. He'd work 8 hours doing electrical work and then come home and work in the garden or the hay field or the cattle. He never told us that that's what one had to do in life to thrive. He showed us. All we had to do was follow his lead, and that was never easy, especially as a child on the farm. Dad's walk was more like a fast march. He planted his heels, walked straight up with his shoulders back. His steps were intentional. There was a snap in Dad's stride, and he was hard to keep up with. He was constantly in that stride, no matter what he was working on, whether business or the farm. Until he decided it was time to stop for the day, it was one pace for Dad, and that was wide open. Dad paid us children once a year for working on the farm, usually after we'd sold the yearly calves. He'd keep the proceeds out that he needed to operate the farm and then have us children gather around him in a semicircle, and he would stand there and count out $100 bills until we'd all received our year's wages. He'd let us stand there and look at them and drool over them for a few moments, and then he'd say, "Now give that to your mother so she can put that in your savings." So that was one of the biggest highs and the biggest downers of our entire year. Dad enjoyed music. He was constantly humming a bar from some old-time song he'd heard on the radio as a child. He taught us those tunes as well. His oldest sister, Beatrice, had suffered polio as a child and was left crippled, so she wasn't able to go out in the yard and play with the rest of the children. So she would sit and listen to the radio and write the lyrics down to those old songs in this book, that black-covered notebook that we used to call Beats Black Book. I remember when I was very young, probably before I even went to school, if Dad was working in town, he would come home for lunch. I always came home for lunch. He'd take an hour for lunch. He'd come in, eat dinner, sit down and read the newspaper for a few minutes, and then lay down on the floor and take a little nap. I remember begging him countless times to get out the little black book and sing a couple of songs with me before he went back to work. He would usually humor me, so some of the first songs that I learned were "Silver-Haired Daddy of Mine," "Picture on the Wall," "Down in the Valley." When I was about 14 years old, I convinced Mom to let me purchase a guitar, with my own money, of course. It was $250, which was just about a year's earnings. I kept it under my bed and I only played it when I knew Dad wasn't going to be home, because I knew there would be a reckoning for having made such a frivolous purchase. One evening I was playing my guitar, and my door opened quickly, and there stood Dad. He looked at that guitar and he said, "Is that yours?" I said, "Yes, sir, it is." And I paused, braced for the worst, and he said, "Nice looking guitar." He closed the door. That was that. Dad made sure his family enjoyed Christmas. Earliest Christmas trees I remember were decked with mostly homemade decorations. We had spray painted sycamore and gum tree balls. There were pine cones and threaded strings of popcorn garland. And there were the same strands of painted green, red, blue, white, and yellow bulbs year after year. It seemed like every year there'd be at least one strand that wouldn't light, triggering a frenzy to find the one or two bulbs that kept the whole strand from lighting. We used the same decorations year after year. Back then I thought Dad was cheap. Today I realize that not replacing things that still works equates to being able to afford things one might not otherwise. One Christmas tradition Mom and Dad had was the use of Dad's old white work socks for stockings. I remember us children raiding his sock drawer trying to find the most stretched out sock we could find, thinking that the longer the sock, the more treats we would get. Well, that never worked. Treats were always the same: an apple, an orange, a banana, and an assortment of nuts. I didn't appreciate that at the time, but now I know that when they were growing up, those were the treats. Very seldom did we not really get what we wanted for Christmas either. One year we all got bicycles, except for little sister Leona, and she scored a tricycle. Mom told us later that Dad had brought all those bicycles home from work, stuck them in their bedroom, and hid them till we went to bed. And she said they couldn't even get through the bedroom for all the bicycles. As I mentioned before, Dad loved the outdoors, and he taught his children to enjoy them as well. And it wasn't just hunting and fishing, it was things like how to identify birds and their calls. And Dad would build birdhouses, bluebird boxes, martin boxes, and to bring the birds in, and then he would sit and enjoy watching them. But he did love his hunting and fishing, so much that he helped found and was a charter member of the Barren River Rod and Gun Club. And I'll never forget, not long after they purchased that land down there on the lake, he conscripted Philip and me to help set out pine trees for the trap range. And I remember it was cold and rainy and our fingers were numb, but there was no stopping until every one of those seedlings were in the ground. Dad had played baseball growing up and when he had time and in the service, and he enjoyed the game a lot. And he was happy that we boys enjoyed it also. So Dad helped coach my team, my Lou Gehrig League, Little League, and Pony League teams all throughout my Little League baseball career. Dad loved the game of cribbage too, and he taught all us children to play. He liked it because you have to do math in your head, and he said it helps keep you sharp. There was a point, I don't know exactly when, that Dad's faith really started to strengthen, and he started attending Sunday school and church regular and becoming active in church. And I remember him taking us to Morrison Park camp meetings. Mainly I just remember how hot it was and I couldn't wait for them to be over. So in summary, being this child of the World War II veteran that I was privileged to call Dad, there's no other man on earth I would have chosen over him. He was the most honest, the most disciplined, the most honorable man I've ever known. I've never seen any father care for his family as responsibly as Dad. It seemed like his every action was an example of how a father is to teach, protect, and love his family. Was he the perfect father? Well, I can't say. I don't know what the perfect father is supposed to be. But I can say without hesitation, Leonard Johnson was the greatest man and humanly father I've ever known.
Hi, how you all doing today? My name's Chris Bollinger. I'm going to be talking about James Weaver. James Weaver is a veteran of World War II. He was born in Warren County and later on moved to Allen County. As the oldest of 10 siblings, his dad gave him the nickname of Boss. back in the day, you know, things were kind of rough. So he would go work in the fields. He would go work at his neighbor's farm, and for 50 cents a week. And then on his way home, after getting his 50 cents, he would stop at the general store, buy a 40-pound bag of flour for 45 cents, bring it home to his mom, so she would help feed the family. At the early age, he was always wanting to do something. There was a horse in town apparently that no one could break, but he did it. No one knows how he did it, but he did it. In December of 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and America was in war. In June of '44, the boss turned 18 and was drafted into the paratroopers. Being friendly type, he fit in real well with the Army. Schooling wasn't very important back then, so reading and writing wasn't one of his things he learned to do, but he, like he used to say, he did all right. So his friends and his fellow soldiers used to help him read his letters and help him write his letters and get him sent home. And then because he still wanted to support his family, he would send home $25 of his $50 he got every month back home to his mom to help feed the family.
He also made, when he went into paratroopers, he made another $50 and sent that home to her too.
Okay, so we got jump pay as well. Yes. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, they still get jump pay.
Yeah.
So it's $150 now.
Yeah.
Though. Well, it was back when I was there.
Yeah.
James finally found himself in the Pacific Theater fighting the Japanese. In preparation for fighting into the mainland, they were island hopping and taking out each one of the islands to get closer and closer to the mainland. Eventually, the plan was to target the island of Okinawa with the biggest amphibious assault the Japanese had ever seen. In 1945, they did finally invade Okinawa, which resulted in over 82 days and 12,500 Americans killed and around 38,000 wounded or missing, and more than 100,000 Japanese and Okinawans were killed, along with the nearly 150,000 Okinawan citizens. James was pretty good at figuring out how to work anything. So he proved to be a good truck driver. And then once they put him on a bulldozer, and he had to figure out how to use the bulldozer. And so what he didn't like about using the bulldozer, though, was when soldiers and stuff were killed, they would bury them, and they weren't burying them deep enough. So once in a while, he would dig up an arm or a leg. But for those of you who don't know anything about war, sometimes at night, the enemy would sneak in and try to take out the Americans and stuff. So one night when James went up to go to use the latrine, he tripped over a Japanese soldier and he emptied his magazine from his weapon into the soldier, then realized that the soldier was already dead. So then after that, whenever he went up to do something in the dark, he heard the noise, he would just shoot at it and hopefully, then one night when he was coming home on a shortcut, he heard somebody yell, "Get in here!" And the next thing you know, he finds himself in a glider. Now he's not a pilot, okay, but now he's in a glider. And a glider, for those of you who don't know what a glider is that's a plane that has no engine. Okay, it's connected to a plane that has an engine. That plane takes off and pulls the glider with it, and then at a certain point they disconnect the tow rope, and then the glider does what it needs to do with no engine and has to land. Well, James can't read. So he has to figure out how to do this all by himself, and it's just him and a Jeep. And he's a paratrooper and he has no parachute. So what do paratroopers not do? They don't land in a plane. So, but he figured it out, landed the plane, got out. Some officer found him and started chewing him out for doing a little bit of damage to the glider. And he's like, "Look, you're lucky you even got here. I'm not even a pilot."
Something that fascinated me, we were talking about this last night in that glider, because I thought it was a small plane. It had a Jeep in there.
Yes, there was a Jeep, and I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I left that part out.
That fascinated me. I was always thinking it was a small plane, but it wasn't.
Him and a Jeep. That's all it was.
Yeah.
And then, but that wasn't his only close call. Another night when they were jumping, the winds caught them and blew them off course, and they landed in water up to their chests. It was dark. And the next morning when the sun came up, they realized they missed jagged rocks that were shaped like spears by like merely inches. So he's had an exciting time. But he never suffered any combat injuries. luckily for him. However, he did make a bet one time with one of the biggest guys around and said, "I bet I can pin you," which he did. But because the big guy lost to James, everybody started harassing him and making fun of him because he got taken out by James. So he picked up James and threw him into a 50-cal machine gun and broke his leg. All right, and because of that, he got put in supply for a while. Okay, and then when they did the occupying forces, James became part of the occupying forces in Japan, and so he was, the soldiers were, once you get the occupying forces in, the soldiers and all the civilians of the Japanese civilians and stuff, they're all kind of commingling and stuff, and you realize that, the soldiers are hungry, the Japanese are hungry, nobody really wants to fight anymore, and James noticed that, and it's like, it takes toll on you, it really does. But luckily for James, after 2 years and 1 month, he was honorably discharged, no injuries, and returned back to farming, spending a short time in Indiana. If you don't mind me asking, where at in Indiana?
A little town called, where did you go when you first got to Indiana? Was it Lincolnville?
I worked in the grass factory for a while.
Yeah, I worked in Marion, Indiana.
Okay, I know that's I'm from Indiana. So. Okay, perfect. Well, outstanding. And then eventually he returned to Allen County and bought the farm from his mom, where he continues to farm his 180 acres today. Him and his wife, Joyce Nadine, had 4 children, and unfortunately, after 74 years of marriage, his wife Nadine died from COVID-19. But he was in Walmart one day. He was in Walmart one day, and he saw this little young lady, and he's like, "Hey, she's kind of cute," you know what I mean? And so they got married in April of 2022. And to this day, James says, you can find anything in Walmart. And today, James is 97 years old, and he hasn't slowed down any. All right, and he states, and yes.
He was born June 6th of 26. That was he turned 18 on D-Day.
Right.
He just missed that.
So
he went in I think 3 months or so after that.
Oh yeah. He got yeah. I was thinking about that the other day. It was like D-Day, June 6th is D-Day.
Yeah.
So yeah, you missed it.
But anyway, sorry.
That's okay. You're fine. You're fine. I like hearing from the actual people. He credits his long life with clean living, hard work, and remaining active. And he states, "I'm going to be 100, whether people like it or not." So I am pleased to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service.
My name is Luke Edmonds. On behalf of the Cultural Center and everyone, we appreciate you all taking the time to come here today to take part in our World War II program. Now, my name is Luke. I'm going to be talking about a gentleman here by the name of Coy Hansen. And so you've already heard a lot of different perspectives during the war, and I certainly hope to add to those perspectives that maybe you haven't considered, and maybe you have considered before, but maybe just from a different perspective that you haven't thought about before. But as I mentioned, the gentleman I'll be talking to you about is a gentleman by the name of Coy Hansen. Now, Mr. Hansen and his family certainly made a great many contributions to the war as we know it today. He came from a family of 10. Mr. Coy Hansen was born in the early 1920s, and as somebody born in that time period, he was set to grow up in perhaps the most difficult times our country has ever faced. Being born in 1921, he was to grow up in what we now know of as the Great Depression. And being in a family of 10, I have no doubt during the Great Depression alone, his family made a number of sacrifices and struggles that we couldn't even begin to think about. But by the time World War II started for our country in 1941, his family was to make even more sacrifices and efforts. Downstairs, you probably heard a great deal about some of the sacrifices made by families on the home front. And I have no doubt that his family had to go through many of those very same challenges. But one of the things that really makes the Hansen family unique is that they didn't send just one son overseas to fight in this conflict, but 3. Coy Hansen had an older brother by the name of Pete, who unfortunately passed away in 1943 in his service in the Aleutian Islands. If you don't know where that is, if you ever get a chance to go north,
and then keep going north, you'll get to Alaska. Alaska is what's a part of those Aleutian Island chains, a part of the theater maybe you never thought about before, but his older brother was stationed there. And he also had a younger brother, a gentleman by the name of Garner, and he served with the U.S. Army Air Corps Intelligence, where he was stationed in a place called New Caledonia. And he had the unique opportunity to encode and decode messages for the U.S. military. So certainly something maybe we don't always think about. But Coy's story in World War II is one that didn't get started until right about August 26, 1942. That was the day he married his wife, Miss Anna Catherine. Coy was only 20 years old and his wife was only 18. Now you might think that's an odd way for his war to start, but it was on the very next day, on the 27th of August, that he got a letter in the mail that he found out he was going to be drafted. Now, if you could think about that for a moment, you've just got married, you're 20, your wife is 18, the war is probably the last thing you want to think about, but that's the day that he found out he was to be drafted. Now, him and his wife had some unique experiences all through this time. While he was being trained, he wasn't actually sent off to training until September, I believe, in that same year. But as he was shipped from state to state to state, he went to places, as you can note right over here, he went to places such as Nevada, Missouri, Oklahoma, South Dakota, and Washington State. And to us today, that might not seem to be a very big deal, but in the early 1940s, him and his wife had never left the state before. He's only 20, she's only 18, and they went from state to state. Now I say they intentionally. He, of course, had to for training. But here she was with her new husband. She didn't want to let him get very far, and so she followed him as much as she could. And the way that she did that all by herself was either by train or by bus. Today we hop in the car, we get on a cell phone, we make a call, we make a text. But they were only able to communicate primarily through letters and through telegrams. Now if she knew where he was and he knew where she was, they could talk on the phone. But she followed him from station to station. One account has it that he would leave a letter with his address on it on a bulletin board in a train station, where when she arrived, she would know the next place that he would be so that she could meet him there. While they traveled together during this time at training, one funny story that just really stood out in my mind, they made it to Oklahoma. And while they were there, she was able to secure an apartment for them, and she was renting from the landlady at that time. And on the very first night they were in this spot in Oklahoma, a big thunderstorm hit. And according to the story, the landlady got so scared, she jumped into the bed with them. She busted in through the door because she was so scared. And I always thought that just spoke volumes of their character. I mean, I don't know how many of us would jump into a bed with a stranger during a thunderstorm to feel safe, but that's what she did. And so certainly they were some top-notch individuals. But in his training, he eventually made it to a spot known as the Jefferson Barracks. And it was there that his training kind of took a more specific turn. As the story has it, he saw a poster that was advertising gunnery school training. And according to his memory, according to the accounts that we have, nobody mentioned to him how dangerous of a job that was. But at the time it paid $20 a month more. And so for a new husband and a new wife to make $20 a month more, it was certainly a big opportunity. And so he had that chance. And so in gunnery school training, he was responsible for learning how to operate equipment such as machine guns on airplanes. So if you think about flying thousands of feet in the air, having the enemy potentially shoot at you, yes, it's a very dangerous job. And that's what he was trained for. Now while he was going through training, there were two main bombers that he was using. One was the B-17, we call that one the Flying Fortress, and the other one was the B-24. It was nicknamed the Liberator. Now by September 11th, 1944, he was eventually shipped to England, where he joined the 451st Bomber Squadron. But when he was there, his bomber changed too. Rather than using the B-17 or the B-24, he was given a brand new B-26 bomber. And this B-26 was a twin-engine bomber. It was made to be better, faster, more effective. It was a new bomber. And so on this bomber, his job was to be a radio operator. But unlike the Flying Fortress and the Liberator, it did not have as exciting of a nickname. It was nicknamed the Widowmaker. You see, many pilots had been trained on different bombers, and so by the time they got this new bomber, some of them maybe weren't used to maybe some of the controls, they weren't used to the equipment, and so unfortunately there were tons of accidents that took place. Fortunately for Mr. Hansen, that was not to be the case, but his entire action and service in the Second World War was in the European theater. And this B-26 bomber was responsible for targeting stationary targets such as maybe bridges or transports, or even performing what was known as strafe runs. And so certainly it was some dangerous work. Now when he was performing these duties, he kept a journal with him. And according to the accounts, he would write an account in his journal about every 5 missions, with the expectation that after about 25 missions, he would get to go home. But by the time the 25th mission rolled around, as he accounted it, there was work that needed to be done. There was work that needed to be completed. If you ever had chores to do at home, you probably heard people say the work's not done until the work's done. Well, people like Mr. Hansen recognized that. And rather than stopping at 25 missions, he went on to serve in 41 missions in World War II. That in and of itself is certainly something to stop and to think about. To go at least twice as many missions as maybe was expected. For his service, he received several medals. You can note he received the Service Medal with 3 Bronze Stars and the Air Medal with 7 oak leaf clusters. Again, just to think about the level of service and going above and beyond the call of duty certainly was not an easy task. Now, by January of 1945, though, he received some great news. Keep in mind, he just got married right before he was drafted, and so he had a young wife. And on January 4th, 1945, he had a son that was born. Now, he didn't know that on January 4th, 1945. He didn't find out about 2 or 3 weeks after the fact. So I can't imagine how that would have made him feel, going up mission after mission after mission. And so he did that up until finally he received the opportunity to have a leave of absence to go home. Now at this time the war was still on. This was about 8 months later. His son was about 8 months years old. About 8 months old. And he had given the chance to go home to see his wife, to see his child. And as the story goes, he was standing on his uncle's porch with his wife, with his baby, and received the news that the war was over. Now, normally when a man would get to go home at this time, it was understood he would have to go back. But to receive news like that was certainly a welcome home gift. And so by the time World War II ended, he certainly had a lot of service for his country under his belt, but it didn't stop there. You may recall I mentioned he had an older brother, Pete, who unfortunately didn't make it home. Well, prior to Pete's service in the Second World War, he worked for the National Park Service at Mammoth Cave National Park. Now eventually after the war, his younger brother, Gardner, did the same thing with the National Park's concessions. He worked there for 52 years. And Coy did the same thing. He started at Mammoth Cave National Park, and he worked at several different national parks until 1982. So here you have a gentleman who served his country well more than most of us, certainly much more than myself. And yet he still chose to do so. And that certainly speaks volumes of his character. And something I'd like to leave you with about Mr. Hansen that I think is very noteworthy to think about. Just a few words here, but it's noted that the war gave him a deep appreciation of the freedoms and benefits of living in the United States. Lots of people take that for granted. His work for the National Park Service reminded him of what our veterans fight for. The beauty of God's creation, family and friends, and freedoms we have here to travel, work, and worship where we want to. And so I encourage each one of you not to take that for granted, because many people have worked hard for us, and some in our military have given their lives. And so as Coy was known to say, thank you for stopping by, and I hope you have a wonderful day. So thank you.
Another story about the Second World War that you may not be familiar with, and a lot of people are not familiar with a group that was called Murrow's Marauders. And after this, if you'd like to read this, I'll be telling you some of this stuff. But if you recall, if you have any kind of historical knowledge of World War II, you understand at toward the end of 1943, almost all of America's efforts in the war were in Europe. They had decided they were going to take Europe first, and then they would deal with the Japanese. But the Japanese had taken so much of the Pacific, it was unbelievable. They had taken portions of the Aleutian Islands, the Philippines, Taiwan, and on and on and on. And they were headed toward India. And at that time, they were, the British, of course, ruled India in those days, and there was a road called the Burma Road. The Chinese were putting up a very good fight. They were losing hundreds of thousands of people, though. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese were being killed by the Japanese. And they were putting up a good fight, but they didn't have any supplies. They didn't have any guns. They didn't have any ammunition. They were, throwing rocks and sticks and doing the best they could to keep the Japanese held back. Well, in August of '43, President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill met in Quebec, Canada for a conference. And at this meeting, they came up with an idea of reopening the Burma Road, which had been bombed out and had been taken, portions of it had been taken by the Japanese. And so the Japanese were wanting to come down the Burma Road, and the British and the Americans were wanting to go up the Burma Road to get supplies to the Chinese. Well, when they decided to do this, they came up with this secret force of volunteers. Now they were getting stuff, and you may have heard in one of the other commentaries about the flying the hump. Well, the flying the hump didn't work, and that was why they had to open the Burma Road. Flying the hump cost them thousands of lives, hundreds of aircraft, and they were getting very small amounts of supplies into the Allies. So they decided to do this. The decision was made to send a force to spearhead the action. They called out a volunteer force of 3,000 men. The entire operation was conducted in secret. Interesting enough, and I have no idea how, they came with 5 of the volunteers were from Metcalfe County. Now that is really odd. A little county in Kentucky in 1943, 5 of 3,000 showed up there. The 6th one on the list is this gentleman right here, Mr. Pritchard, and there's a picture of him. He also served in this unit. From Metcalfe County, there was a Howard Akery, a Maxie Douglas, a Philip Jeffries, an Edward Leftwich, and an Otis Van Zandt. Of course, Mr. Joseph Pritchard was from Glasgow. This is a picture that I have of Otis, if you want to pass it around. Otis, being from Metcalfe County in 1940, was what? A farmer. He dealt with mules and horses. So he was assigned to deal with the mules. He was a teamster in this unit because this unit had no vehicles. They had only mules and ended up with horses, which they couldn't hardly use. They had a shipload of mules coming around India, and they got torpedoed by the Germans, and they lost 360 mules. So the Australians had been using horses on some of the islands that they were on, and so they brought them and gave them a bunch of horses. Well, horses don't do well in mountain trails and jungles and rivers, as you well know if you know anything between horses and mules. So ended up, they mostly just ate the horses because they had a hard time getting food. The only food they were able to get, the only supplies they were able to get was parachuted in. The wounded could only get out by small Piper Cub aircraft. That was the only way they could get them out. Normally, if you got wounded, you just kept on going if you could walk. If you couldn't walk, they carried you. If they could get an aircraft in, these Piper Cubs, they would haul you out. This unit was designated the 5307 Composite Unit. It was codenamed Galahad, and it was popularly known as Merle's Marauders. Brigadier General Frank Merle was the head of it. They assembled and they trained in the jungles of India, and by February 44, they started their long march out of India over the Lido Road, over the Himalayan mountains and into Burma. It was 1,000 miles. You ever think about walking a mile or two? Think about walking 1,000 miles with a pack on your back and a machine gun on your shoulder, or a mortar or ammunition or whatever else you might need. I have a few of their weapons over here, and after I get finished, you're more than welcome to handle them, look at them, and I'll try to answer some questions. All the gear, as I mentioned before, was carried by pack horses and mules. And there was a lot of roads, a lot of mud. It rained a lot. Roads were so muddy. And once they entered Burma, the Japanese become a constant problem. Now their mission, of course, was to reopen the Burma Road and to gather intelligence and reconnaissance of the Japanese forces that they felt like might be trying to move toward India. And that was a big problem because if the Japanese had taken India, it would have been a big deal in World War II. The men were supplied, as I said, by airdrops, and they were taken out by Piper Cubs. Of course, this mud was a chronic misery. Climbing up these steep hills and down and through rivers and crossing day after day and not being wet and muddy. Food was a problem. They mainly consisted of K rations, which were meant for a short-term use, and they didn't provide very much nutrition, nourishment. They were just kind of fillers. And they started eating the horses because they were getting protein from that. Now that's not in this story, but I've done a lot of research, and there's some more over there on that. I was blessed to know one of them, Otis Van Zandt. I never knew. I knew him from the time I was a little boy. He ran a slaughterhouse about two miles from my house. I went to school with his youngest daughter. I never knew that Otis Fenzak was a hero, as these other 3,000 were as well. Otis was a good guy. Don't remember nobody saying nothing bad about him. In his last 3 years before he died, he finally started. He was a member of the VFW, which I'm also a member. And so he started coming to the meetings. And I noticed as a lot of the World War II veterans have got older, they're more willing to talk about their trials and tribulations that they went through. Almost everybody in my neighborhood, of my great uncles in that age, were World War II veterans. I didn't know that until I got older because they never talked about it. I remember some conversations about breaking into cellars in Italy and getting wine, you know, the fun that they had, but they didn't talk about the horrors of war. Otis came and he started coming to the meetings, and we would sit sometimes for hours and listen to his stories. So I have a lot of first-hand knowledge, which I don't have time to tell you about, of somebody that was there, somebody that suffered through this. The train was so bad and they lost so many animals to the falls. But according to Otis, that picture of that mule made it all the way through. It made it all the way through the whole situation. It was his mule. He said that mule could smell Japanese. He said if that mule started throwing its head up and down, there was a Jap around somewhere. I don't know, that's just what he told me. But anyway, as they moved along, they were guided by the Burmese, the native Burmese, and they had a kitchen tribe, and they had guides that were as young as 12 years old. But don't let their age fool you. They were tough. There were many Chinese soldiers that were young as 10 in uniform. Many, he said. There was lots. Many were killed. Along toward the end of this adventure, of this thing, their last operation, and he told us a lot of stories about capturing this, and I cannot pronounce it, Kenya airfield. And he told me about what all they went through and how they dealt with that. And the final casualty record of the Marauders showed that there were 93 deaths, 30 non-battle deaths, 293 wounded, and 8 missing in action, which was 14% of the men of that mission. Nearly everyone suffered from some sort of disease. They suffered from mainly malaria and dysentery from drinking that nasty water. They were given iodine tablets to kind of clean the water up, but I remember those from my days in the service. You put that in your water, and your water tastes nasty. And you got to shake it for 30 minutes before it's good to drink. Well, you ain't got time. You need a drink of water, you got to go. But they suffered from tropical diseases that had never been heard of. Jungle diseases, exhaustion, malnutrition. There was very few of them that didn't suffer some sort of disease. For their accomplishment, they were awarded the Presidential Unit Citation in 1966. And in 2019 and 2020, the U.S. Senate and the House passed a bill awarding them the Congressional Gold Medal for one of the highest congressional medals, the contribution to this country. I just wish Otis was here to tell you about it. If he would, he probably wouldn't. He probably wouldn't say nothing about it in front of you all. But it was just so amazing. But the people of this country need to understand what the World War II veterans went through, and they don't. That's all I have.
But you know, there were some older men who were there too. In fact, when my son registered for the draft, my husband Clarence had to register again too, even though he'd registered several years before. I sure am glad he didn't have to go, because I don't know how I would have taken care of this farm and all the children. We stay pretty busy here on the farm. I think that helps keep us from getting quite so lonely and worry so much. The girls and I have been picking beans this morning in the garden, and we'll be breaking beans and canning them tomorrow. And Clarence and the boys, Connor, Rusty, and Jack, they've been chopping out the tobacco today, trying to stay ahead of the weeds. Now, they have to work a little harder with John gone, but they don't seem to mind. Our boys are certainly no strangers to hard work. And Rusty, he's going to take care of old Dick. That's John's old horse. And you know, he just feeds and waters that old horse and brushes him when he can. I think that makes him feel a little bit closer to his brother while he's gone. You know, things on the home front here sure have changed since this war started. There's a lot of things we can't get because they send it all to the war effort. And the government rations some things like gasoline or tires or silk stockings and canned food and things like coffee and sugar and tobacco. Now, the rationing doesn't affect us as much because we grow most of our own food. And we have no use for gasoline or tires because we don't even have a car. Clarence never learned to drive. I don't need any silk stockings here on Glover's Creek. The government gave all of us military families a banner to hang in our window to show everybody that we have a son in the war. And it's a pretty white banner. It's got a blue star on it. And they told us that if something should happen, that our boy should be killed overseas, that we would get a star, a gold star instead of a blue star. And we just hope and pray that we don't get one of those yellow stars. You know, I guess the hardest part for the mother with a boy overseas is the worry, the not knowing. Not knowing if he's cold or hungry or homesick or if he'll ever be coming home. In fact, one day we got some awful news. We were told that my boy John had been killed in action. Now, that was a mistake, and thank God they cleared it up pretty quickly because we just all just about grieved ourselves to death until they took care of it. But I could see how that mistake was made because there's another boy lived right on down the road a little bit who was a Jordan boy too. So I can see how they made that mistake. And the only way we can hear from our boy is through letters. Now, John can't read or write real well because he had to quit school in the 3rd grade to help his daddy on the farm. But he's getting better at it. And now all the words may not be spelled right, but I can usually make them out. And it's a comfort to me to know that he was able to write the letter. I go to the mailbox every day about the time that the mailman's supposed to run to see if I get a letter from my boy. And in fact, I think I hear Mr. Pinkley coming now, coming up the road. That's our mailman. Well, I better get this letter out there. I've got it addressed to PFC John H. Jordan. I sure hope he knows how proud we are of him. You know, I never knew how important that old mailbox was going to be to us until John had to go overseas. But it's been real nice talking with you folks, and I hope you've enjoyed your trip down here to the holler on Glover's Creek.